Okay, so it looks like most of you are here. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us today, whether it's morning, afternoon, evening, middle of the night. I'd love to see where you're from, so put in the chat box if you can, where you're currently residing and joining us on this webinar today. My name is Julie Wilbers. I serve as the Director of International Student and Scholar Services here at Vanderbilt University. We really appreciate our Parents and Families program for putting this on today and helping serve as a conduit between our office and the parents of our international students. So we're going to talk about what you need to know as a parent of an international student. I'm going to kick us off and then I'm going to hand it over to my colleagues. Next slide, please. This is the ISSS team. You see a picture of myself, joined by Andrea Petrick and Jillian Hotman, both assistant directors who will be presenting today. Radhika Reddy serves as a CVIS manager, which means she does a lot of our data analysis, and she also serves as an advisor to international students and scholars. Kelly Mahoney is an international student and scholar advisor. Manglin Hu is our newest member. She's an international support coordinator, former international student herself at Vanderbilt, and has been a wonderful support for our international students and scholars. And finally, Peggy Knupp is senior administrative assistant, and she's been with the office for many years. So our staff members bring years of experience, not only in higher education, but specifically in international higher education, to the mission and goals of the office. Many of us have lived abroad, speak other languages, maybe were born abroad, and have worked with international students and scholars for years. In our office, we have what's called an assigned advisor model. So every student, depending on their education level, the level of their degree program, the actual degree, and sometimes even based off the major, they will have an assigned advisor. So for undergraduate students, that's either going to be Kelly Mahoney, Andrea Petrick, or Jillian Hotman. And we do this so that the students can get to know their advisor very well in ISSS. We get to know their academic program. We get to know the requirements of their program. We see common trends and issues among students within a certain level and program, and we can serve them hopefully more holistically, which is the idea of this model. So when a student's reaching out to our office, they should contact their assigned ISSS advisor directly. If they contact our main email box, we will just forward it to their assigned advisor. So it will take a little bit longer to get to their advisor if they contact the ISSS mailbox. And if they have any questions about who their advisor is, they are more than welcome to reach out to us just to confirm. Finally, what we do. Among many things, we help students with the visa process. We advocate for students both on campus and off campus as we see common issues or concerns. We voice them to the campus community, to our national association, and to other entities and organizations nationwide. And we provide adjustment support. So we'll go a little bit more in detail on these things, but I just wanted to end before I transition to my colleagues with a few reminders. Coming to a new country, as you can imagine, is quite stressful. There's a lot to know, particularly if you are a new university student. And the visa process can be very complex. So it is imperative that your son or daughter work very closely with our office, that he or she reads all of our emails, attends orientations, asks questions, and communicates directly with his or her advisor so that the visa process doesn't have to be as daunting or concerning. So the more contact they have with our office, the more they're paying attention, the more we can assist them and provide them with options early on. All right, so now I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Andrea Petrick, and she's going to talk about ways we support international students. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the specific support that we do provide international students. We know that connections with other students and with the local community is very important to international students. So throughout the year, we offer many ways that students can connect with each other and also with the local community. We have a couple of programs with community partners. So First Friends and Eat, our friendship family programs. So this pairs international students with a host in the local community, so that way they have another friendly face in the community who might not necessarily be a Vanderbilt person. All of our friendship families are, they undergo a background check so that we can ensure that, your students are safe. And many of them just really love interacting with international students and helping them navigate Nashville. Commencement at the university happened a couple of weeks ago, and some of our community partners attend commencement with their students because they meet them, when they arrive, and then they stay friends with them throughout their whole time here. So it's really nice to just see those relationships formulate. Other programs that we do include holiday-themed celebrations. We do an annual Thanksgiving dinner for international students and scholars. We have other events during holiday periods, like the winter months, especially when that holidays can be a bit isolating for some students. So we try to have these activities so that they can still feel connected and supported. We help, we include students in other events that are happening in Nashville. We have a monthly newsletter that goes out to all international students that highlights events that our office does, or highlights events that other offices are putting on, or things happening in the local community that might be of interest to international students. So just all these ways to help students know what's going on and to give them opportunities to connect with each other. We also know that employment is very important for many international students. So we do workshops and provide information along the way to help students navigate options available within their visa. So you may have heard of OPT, or optional practical training, where students on an F1 visa can apply for work authorization after they graduate. So we provide a lot of support to help students navigate that process. And also, we're also here to listen. So we may not necessarily have all the answers or be able to provide everything that they need, but we can at least listen and point them in the right direction. Now, to that effect, just to briefly mention, one thing that's important to note is that US culture tends to be very, very individualistic. And I say that for two reasons. One, that's going to influence the kind of support that students are provided with. So in the US, it's very much, here's a list of resources. We're going to empower you to do the work and find, and find what you need on your own. A great example of this is career services at Vanderbilt. There are wonderful support at Vanderbilt and help students navigate the process for finding jobs and help them understand how to put together a resume or CV, but they're not necessarily going to help them find a job, so to speak. So that's kind of an important trend, I think, in the culture here. It's going to be very much the student's responsibility for taking the resources and kind of working to find what works best for them. Another reason why that's so important is that influences how we communicate with parents. So in the US, there's so much focus on individual privacy. In a university setting, there's a law called FERPA, which governs what kind of information we can and cannot provide about a student. So if somebody calls our office and wants to know their student's schedule or how well their student is doing in classes, we cannot provide that information without a written release from the student. So that's important to know, because if you contact our office, we may be very limited in what kind of information we can provide about your student. They're welcome to sign a release that allows members of the university to release certain information, but there is a process for that. Another thing I would say is that it's rare that a university official would contact a parent. Typically, that only happens in an emergency. So just something to keep in mind. Now, getting back to some of the more fun stuff, I guess. There are many, many student organizations at Vanderbilt, and many of them are focused on different cultures and internationally focused. There's a website called AnchorLink that students can access to find out more about the different student organizations. They can also start their own. There are numerous different organizations, so many ways to get involved on campus. Two organizations in particular we'd like to highlight would be the Multicultural Leadership Council, which focuses a lot on diversity and cultural awareness, and also the International Student Council. This organization in particular focuses on networking and career opportunities. Every semester they do a very well-attended networking session for international students to give students that ability to practice and connect with others in similar fields. So these are just a few examples of what students can do. And then finally, one thing our office does is orientation for international students. So we don't organize the undergraduate level orientation, but we do participate in it. So we'll be there to discuss F1 and J1 status. Throughout the summer, we also are involved in pre-arrival sessions. So we facilitate a number of sessions to help students in their transition to Nashville and to their visa status. Some of the things that we want to highlight include using their health insurance plan, working in the US. We recently did a session related to the visa interview. So many, many more. Your students will get more email information about this. And of course, if they have questions, they can always let us know. And now with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Jillian.
Thanks, Andrea. So in this last section, before we open it up to questions, which we hope that you have plenty of questions for us, we wanted to talk about safety. We know that the safety of your student is probably a central concern you have, especially because you're going to be separated by such great distances while they're here at Vanderbilt. So we wanted to take some time to share some of the safety resources that are available to students while they're at the university. So the first thing we like to highlight is that Vanderbilt University has its own police service. The Vanderbilt University Police Department, or VUPD is what it's called, has officers on duty 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. These officers are present at campus events. Sometimes they're just around at events to say hello to students, but students can get in contact with VUPD officers at any time while they are here at Vanderbilt. There's also a great resource called VandySafe. This is a free app that we encourage all students to download on their phones, and it's a central app hub for safety and emergency information. So students can use this app to contact VUPD via a phone call or a chat. They can request a virtual walk home where they initiate this in the app and it sends their location to the VUPD, and VUPD can monitor their walk as they get to their location. And once they get to their location, they can end their walk home to let VUPD know that they got there safely. It also includes the schedules for a service called Vandy Rides. And I don't think we highlighted these on the slides, but I think it's a great resource as well. Vandy Rides are shuttles that operate on campus during the evening hours from 6 p.m. to 1 a.m. So students can take these shuttles to avoid having to walk across the campus, kind of during that late after dark hours. Within the app, they can also share their location with VUPD, access emergency guides, and then access support resources related to safety. So it's a great app, and we would encourage that all of your students download that for their time at the university. There's also something called Alert VU, and that is Vanderbilt Emergency Notification System. All students are automatically enrolled with their Vanderbilt email, but they can also opt in to receive Alert VU text notifications or phone call notifications. And this is the university's way of alerting the community if there's an emergency that could be impacting the students. This is everything from crime or suspicious threats on campus to emergency alerts related to severe weather to prepare students to take shelter in the case of severe weather. So that's, again, a great resource. We encourage students to opt into text notifications in addition to their automatic enrollment via email. And then card access is required to enter all dormitories and a lot of other places on campus. So that's just another level of security that exists at the university. If you ever have questions or your students have questions about safety or security and they're not sure where to go, they can always contact us and we can refer them out to the right resources to get the information that they need. Next slide. And scams. So this is something that we like to include in our safety section because scams are becoming an increasingly prevalent issue, not just for international students and scholars, for domestic students, and really anybody. I'm sure you've heard of scam stories occurring in your own home countries as well. But this is something that we've been really working to educate students on so that they can best protect themselves and learn how to identify potential scams. So on this slide, we have some examples of scams that we have actually seen happen to Vanderbilt University international students. One situation is students receiving calls from people acting like a U.S. government agency, so pretending to be from the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of State, from ICE, maybe making threats that the student will be deported, or making claims that the student was involved in a crime. And to resolve the issue, they're demanding that the student provide them gift card codes or wire money. So this is a scam that we often see targeting international students because they are here in a different status. And so scammers know that making threats to a student's status or their legal status can maybe induce them to provide money. So again, this is an example of a scam we see commonly impacting international students. There's also rental scams. So students looking for housing for when they come to the US and they see these nice, fancy luxury apartments with suspiciously low rent prices. They're asked to pay a deposit. And then after they pay that deposit, they realize that the apartment doesn't exist. We've seen scams related to fake job opportunities. So students receiving emails about job opportunities for a position that maybe they didn't apply for. It's asking them to pay deposits for materials or equipment prior to even starting their position. It's kind of a sign that that's potentially a scam and not legitimate. So when we're talking to students about scams and how to start to identify them, we like to share some common themes that we see among these scam calls, emails, texts that students receive. So the scammers will often convey a sense of urgency. So they'll make it sound like this needs to be resolved immediately. They need to pay immediately. There's a time limit. So they want to get students to feel really rushed. They'll often try to isolate students. So they'll tell students, you can't talk to anybody else about this. You can't call your family. You can't call the university. They may be requesting personal information. So banking information, personally identifiable information like details about their birth date or identification numbers. They can start to become increasingly aggressive in their demands. And then they're demanding something. So they're demanding payment via gift cards. They're demanding money to be wired. They're making threats against your status. So threatening to deport you or threatening to arrest you. And these are all signs that this is likely a scam. Something we always like to convey is that the United States government and their agencies will never ask for money from students over a phone call. The United States government, we like to say they're very old-fashioned in that much of their communication is going to be via written communication through the mail. So it's very unlikely that a student will get a legitimate phone call from a government agency. If a student is ever, and the other thing I guess we like to say is that if there was a legitimate legal issue that a student was involved in or a legitimate issue pertaining to their immigration status, you can never resolve that through payment of a fee or a fine. You can't resolve that by giving money. And so if somebody's demanding money to resolve an issue, that's a pretty clear sign that that's a scam as well. We always like to give the message that ISSS is here to support, VUPD is here to support. If a student ever has any doubt, they're not sure if an email is legitimate or they get a weird phone call and they're just not sure, they should contact our office or VUPD immediately, and we can help determine the legitimacy of the scam, or if it is a scam, help the student report the scam. In general, if they think it's a scam, it likely is a scam. And again, I know we went into a lot of detail about this, and we don't want to share this to instill fear or scare anybody, but it has been a pretty common issue. And, you know, once this money is given to scammers, it's very unlikely that it's ever going to be recovered. So it's best to really ensure that students are aware of these issues so that they can start to identify them before they become a victim to a scam. And that is the end of our content. We are so excited to meet your students, to hopefully meet you and just kind of welcome them to Vanderbilt and to the Nashville community. If they have any questions or doubts, they should contact their assigned ISSS advisor. We have the emails here. And then the earlier slide had kind of the breakdown so students can identify who their advisor is. But from here, I believe we have all of our advisors on the call. So everybody is here to answer questions. So I think we are going to open it up to questions from you all.
Thanks, Jillian. While we wait for more questions, I did want to elaborate on one of the ones that I answered because there was a question about the visa stamp. So the visa stamp is what they get at the consulate when they present their I-20 document. It's the actual foil in the passport. That visa stamp can expire. Some countries are only given 1-month visa stamps. Some are given 4-year visa stamps. It depends on reciprocity agreements and then the decision at the consulate. But what that does is it allows the individual to request entry into the US in that visa status. It can expire while in the US. It does not have to be renewed as long as the student is maintaining his or her visa status, and only has to be reviewed if that student is leaving the US and re-entering in that visa category and it has expired. Canadian citizens are exempt from the actual visa stamps in their passport, but they are not exempt from requesting entry in F1 status when they cross the border or go through pre-flight inspection. Andrea, did you want to elaborate on any of the questions that you answered, maybe the one on housing?
Yeah, sure. So there was a question about housing and is it available for students during the holidays or the summer? The housing office will have much more information. We'll be communicating this to students throughout the year, but in general, the expectation is that during holidays and especially the summer, students really are supposed to be off campus. There are opportunities, like during the winter break and Thanksgiving break and spring break, I believe, they can apply to stay in the dormitories, but that does come at an extra cost. And then also during the winter break, there's a 2-week period where the university itself is closed. So the services available for students will be very minimal. I think they do have some meals available or some options available for food, but it will be very, very minimal compared with when classes are in session. Summer housing is also only available if students are going to be here during the summer taking classes at Vanderbilt. So housing will provide much more information on that as well.
I'm just going to read some of these questions that came in through the chat, if that is okay. When does the health insurance become active and does it last all calendar year?
Yeah, I can answer that question. The health insurance is active from August of this year to August of next year. So it does cover the whole academic year. And your students will automatically be enrolled in the student health insurance plan once they register for classes. So there's nothing special that they have to do to activate it. That will automatically happen. I also want to plug one of our upcoming pre-arrival sessions. I think the first or second week of June. The representatives from SHIP, the Student Health Insurance Plan, will be talking about the insurance, how students can use it and what it covers. So that would be a wonderful session for students to attend if they have questions about insurance.
Another question in here about housing that I will attempt to answer. Anyone else can also hop in. I will preface this by saying a lot of information about housing will come directly from the Office of Residential Education. But the question is, do they need to change dorms between year 1 and year 2 and so forth? So yes, at Vanderbilt, something that is unique is that first-year students live in an area of campus called the Commons. And these are a series of residence halls that are only for first-year students. And as a result, after the student's first year, there is a process where they elect or choose their housing for the next year. But yes, all first-year students will end up changing residence halls after the first year, because of the nature of how Vanderbilt sets up the Commons specifically just for first-year students. So they wouldn't be able to continue in that same residence hall after year 1. Andrea or Julie, did you want to add anything to that?
I would just add that housing in our experience has gotten stricter about who can remain over the summer. So I would just ensure that they have, that you have a plan in place, and that if any exemption is requested, that there are extenuating circumstances and that that's communicated to housing well in advance. Joey, and I'm going to do my best to answer the question about the medical document. So the question was, medical document was recommended to be submitted by the middle of May. Son just finished IB exam. We had no time to prepare. Is there a strict deadline? Could this be submitted by the end of June? So I did my best to look the answer to this up, and it looks like, according to the registrar's website, and I just provided in the answer, that it has to be provided before the student can register for their initial term of enrollment. So I don't think they have a strict deadline, but they won't be able to enroll in classes before that's taken care of. Does anyone want to add to that or contradict that? Okay, and we can put in the chat box the link to the immunization requirements as well. So I'm going to ask another question. Someone asked how long it will take to receive the visa after application. Andrea, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, and the answer is it depends, which unfortunately in the immigration world, that's an answer that we know everybody hates, but it is true. A lot's going to depend on the embassy. Embassies do tend to be busier during the summer. So for some people, they could get their visa in a matter of days. Sometimes additional checks and screening are required, so it could take a little bit longer than that. If your student encounters any kind of delays or problems while applying for a visa, let us know. We can't necessarily intervene in the visa process. Like there's no power that we have to expedite the process or guarantee a certain result. But if a situation arises where a student might not be able to arrive in time for the fall semester because of consular delays, we can assist the student with next steps in terms of updating their documents, and maybe they have to defer their admission to another term. So do keep us informed, or make sure that the student keeps us informed so that we can provide that assistance.
I'm going to answer another one pertaining to the I-20 because it's related to the visa process. But a question about how long it takes for the I-20 to be issued, that the I-20 that will be needed for the student to make their visa appointment. Do we need to do anything to get documents to us to book the appointment at the U.S. consulate? So the first step before a student can book the appointment at the consulate is to get their Vanderbilt I-20. All admitted students should have received an email from ISSS with the instructions for requesting the I-20. If your student was admitted and paid their deposit and for some reason hasn't received that email, reach out to us and we can make sure that we get that figured out. But once an I-20 request is submitted, our processing time is about 10 business days. I will say in most cases, we can get it processed a little bit quicker than that, but the earlier that you apply for your I-20, the earlier you can get that document. And then from there, you will pay what's called the SEVIS I-901 fee and then book the visa interview at the consulate. Once the I-20 is issued, an email does get sent to the student that includes the details for the next step. So what is the SEVIS fee? How do I pay it? What are my next steps in the visa process? So all of that information will come once that I-20 has been issued.
Jillian, I'm going to answer the question related to student who will not receive A-level results until the day after international orientation. Should he apply for academic credit from those courses whilst waiting for the grades to come in? I don't have an answer to the question other than that's going to have to go through the registrar's office. I'm going to put the link in the answer here unless some of my ISSS colleagues know an exact answer to that. But if not, that will be a question for the registrar's office to answer.
And I can answer this question on the August 14th move-in. So that date is in place so that international students can attend the mandatory international student orientation that will start on the 15th, I believe. So it is imperative that your student be able to attend international student orientation. If there's any kind of conflict, the contact for international student orientation for undergrads will be the Office of Residential Commons. So if there's any issue or questions about move-in and international student orientation in general, their email is just commons@vanderbilt.edu, and I can put that in the chat.
We've had a couple questions about when they'll receive the I-20. Once we receive a completed request, we will process the I-20 within 5 to 7 business days. So the student has to make sure that they've gotten the email from us, the email sent to their Vanderbilt email account, that they've read all the instructions, and that they've actually hit submit on that request. If they have any questions whatsoever, they should contact their assigned ISSS advisor. And then once we issue the I-20, we upload it to their account in the ISSS portal that they have access to where they submitted the request. It's all electronic. We sign electronically, and then they can download it and print it, and then make that visa appointment.
There was a question about tuition payment due dates. I'm going to put the link in the chat for the Office of Student Accounts. This is the department at Vanderbilt that handles all student billing. Once the invoices are issued, it'll include information about a deadline. I believe this is sometime in August. I don't have the exact date, but I will put the link to their office in the chat. I don't know if anybody on the team knows that exact date offhand.
I already put the
Great.
link, Jillian should be there.
Thank you.
Also, another plug for our pre-arrival sessions. Actually, next week, the Student Accounts Office will be doing a session on payment processes. There's also a question I wanted to answer about the insurance. If a student already has an insurance plan, are they still required to purchase SHIP? In general, yes, they are required to have the SHIP plan. There is a waiver process that will be communicated over the summer, I think closer to the start of classes, but there are very strict criteria for waiving SHIP. And if your student has any questions about that, they can contact SHIP more for more details.
There was a question about when the first tuition payment is due. Kelly put a link in the chat box to student accounts. They're the office that oversees payment. A quick Google search yielded that it says semester will be due December 31st. If you have any questions about that payment or who to work with, what vendors to work with, make sure to work with student accounts on that one. And then the follow-up question was, when will roommates be defined? I'm not sure if we have the answer to that question. Andrea, Jillian, do you happen to know that? If not, we can put a link to the housing office.
I believe that housing will facilitate that and will provide more information about that.
I will say on that note that if your student is having issues with a roommate, encourage him or her to seek assistance early on. As you can imagine, especially if a student's living with someone for the first time, there can be issues that arise. And I think that early communication, notifying housing, working with our office just to get assistance before any stress or issues build can be really instrumental. Hopefully that's not the case, but if it does happen, the earlier they reach out, the better.
There is a kind of specific scenario question in here. A student is currently in the US for another program or another degree level for high school. And there's some questions about the transfer process. So this is specific to the student situation. There is a process for the student to request a transfer of their CVIS record to Vanderbilt. So they will work with, I'd probably recommend this particular student to get in touch with their ISSS advisor here at Vanderbilt, but the student will indicate in their I-20 request that they are currently in the US in F1 status and that they plan to transfer their CVIS record to Vanderbilt. They'll then contact their current international office to request that transfer to happen. Then once that CVIS record is transferred to Vanderbilt, we'll be able to issue the student's new I-20. The student can continue to use the same F1 visa as long as it is still valid. And they can choose to remain in the US during that period between programs, or they can travel internationally and then re-enter the US. If they decide to travel internationally, they will need to re-enter with the new Vanderbilt I-20. So that's just important to keep in mind. Again, if the student has questions about this specifically to their situation, they are welcome to reach out to their ISSS advisor for more detailed information.
If they're in F1 status prior to graduation, if they plan to remain in the US after graduation, we've been hosting immigration attorneys on campus and virtually to talk about immigration options after graduation. And while they can't get specific legal advice on what their options are, as every case, a situation is very nuanced depending on where they're from, country of birth, what they're majoring in, a lot of other circumstances, they can get general information. These immigration attorneys present for free to our students, so they should be on the lookout for that. They're just trying to find the general direction to go in. There's a question, how many students is each advisor managing? That's a good question. So it really depends on who it is. I do have a caseload. I have the smallest caseload because of other responsibilities. But I would say anywhere between 250 to 600. And, you know, again, that depends on what other responsibilities are assigned to that individual. That tends to be a fairly good caseload compared to a lot of our peers. I think we do have good response times, good processing times, but what it does mean is we can't respond immediately to questions. We're not always, 24/7 on our computers, available to answer any question or request. And if the student follows the process, we're able to be more efficient. We're able to get to them in a timely manner. Sometimes students will consider something urgent. And of course, their sense of urgency might be different than maybe our perception of what is urgent. And, if there are real urgent circumstances, for example, death in the family member, they've been contacted by, a government official, or let's hope this doesn't happen, but let's say they've been a victim of a scam, like Jillian was mentioning. We are always available to help students in those types of urgent circumstances. So we ask that they are patient and understand that we cannot get to every request immediately. I hope I answered that question well.
I see a question in here about roommate assignments. That would be a great question for the housing office. We're not involved in assigning roommates, but housing should be able to answer that question and give more guidance on the roommate selection process.
Who wants to tackle the question on whether undergrads are able or encouraged to work during their time here? Andrea, you want to take a stab at that? Radhika, you can go ahead and type a response, but I'll have Andrea elaborate.
Yeah, so I feel like at Vanderbilt, students are encouraged to do internships, and there are opportunities for students to do so. For international students, they are required to have an authorization called CPT, which enables them to do an internship, but there are some conditions with that, and we help students understand those conditions and apply for that appropriate authorization. But I will say, we see students do internships over the summer on a pretty frequent basis. They do need to allow some time for the application to take place. It's processed through the CPT application goes through our office, and it's about a 5 to 7 business day processing time once we have a complete application. But there are some other pieces involved with that, such as enrolling in an internship course and getting some other permissions in place. So we do expect that the student will start the process, in advance, so that they have their work authorization before they begin.
And then I would just add, students do have the opportunity to work on campus at Vanderbilt University. So if they want to get a part-time job working in the campus libraries or something like that, students in F1 status are able to do that without any additional authorization. They're limited to 19.5 hours per week during the academic year, but can work up to 40 hours per week over official breaks like the winter break or the summer break if they are staying in Nashville for that time. If a student is ever uncertain if a job is considered on campus versus off campus, then they should check with their assigned advisor, because as Andrea was mentioning, anything off campus that's not for Vanderbilt University will require the student to obtain additional authorization.
Regarding the question about insurance for housing and personal belongings. I'm not sure what the advisable amount is that they should purchase. We may have some information on our website. However, I would defer to housing on that one. And of course, I'm assuming it's related to how valuable their belongings are. So I would think, my hunch is that it would be more person dependent, but I'm thinking housing should have more of a specific answer to your question. But it would be very important for them to get that, and it's great that you're thinking about that as well.
Yeah, and I'm putting a link in the chat. There's some information on the housing website specifically about insurance, like renters insurance, that covers some of the some personal property as well. So just wanted to share that.
Any final questions? We do thank you so much for joining us today. We are here to help your students. We want to be support for them. Again, the earlier they reach out for assistance, even if they're just struggling a little bit with their classes or with meeting people, making friends, whatever that may be. The earlier they reach out, the earlier we can guide them in the right direction. Sometimes it's just good for them to vent and have someone to talk to. And we're here to help them be as successful as we can.
One other question I'll go ahead and answer live, because I think I saw another question about this earlier. Some have been asking about an SSN or a social security number. So students are eligible to apply for an SSN if they have an on-campus job offer. They do need to have an on-campus job to apply for that. They also have to be physically present in the US. So there's a few other criteria, but it is associated with employment. So if a student's in that situation where they need to apply for an SSN and they have an on-campus job, we can definitely provide them with more information on how to do that. It is not required for a bank account. So a lot of the local banks will let students open up accounts even if they don't have an SSN. They might have to show their I-20 or their Vanderbilt ID. But the SSN itself is not required to open up a bank account.
I'll just add to that while it's not required for a lot of things, it can be helpful. The SSN is used in many ways in the US. So if they're thinking about getting an on-campus job, it may be good for them to get some experience, meet new people, and also have the opportunity to get that social security number that they'll, probably at some point, going to need. So. All right. Thank you again for joining us. And everyone enjoy your day, evening, night. Bye, everyone.
Bye.